Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you. And thank you so much for uh, joining us today from across varied time zones. Today, we will be delving into archives of two sculptors to think through the relationship between sculpture and photography. And I'm Nupur Desai. I'm researcher at Asia Art Archive in India, and I will be moderating today's session. So before we begin, for those of you who are less familiar with our work, Asiad Archive is an independent, not-for-profit organization that focuses on documentation and research on recent art and art histories from across Asia. Our main office is in Hong Kong, where we have a reference library with a large collection of books, periodical zines, and the materials in our archive are digitized and are made available online for reference. And we also activate these materials through various programs, exhibitions, and publications. And we also have an office in New Delhi, where I'm currently speaking to you from. So before we delve into the presentations by our speakers today, I would like to take a moment to set the context for this conversation. Today's program, The Artwork and Its Image, a dialogue between sculpture and photography, is organized as part of a series of workshops and talks in tandem with our ongoing exhibition of archival materials from the Mrinalini Mukherjee Archive. And it has emerged through multiple conversations with my colleagues in Hong Kong and in India office. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So we began digitizing Mukherjee's papers sometime in late 2020 and launched this archive more than a year ago on AA's website. And for those of you who may not know about her practice, Mrinalini Mukherjee was a prolific sculptor and an extraordinary figure in the realm of modern and contemporary art in India. And she broke new grounds as an artist in numerous ways. Mrinalini Mukherjee was best known for her monumental effigy-like sculptures, and you can see some examples in these photos here. She emerged onto the art scene in the 1970s, and through her practice, she kind of challenged the prevailing conventions of sculptural practice that were at the time largely dominated by male artists. And in her 4-decade-long practice, she experimented with various mediums like fiber, ceramic, and bronze. And her archive consists of documents, including documentation of her artworks and art-making process, but also photographs her travels to art historical sites, newspaper clippings, her lecture notes, papers related to various art organizations that she was associated with, and documents on her contemporary artists, including writings, catalogs, and ephemera. However, we will be kind of focusing on a specific aspect of photo documentation in her practice in today's program shortly. And before going into that, I will share briefly about the ongoing exhibition and its proposition. Next slide, please. So the exhibition that is going on in Hong Kong in our library space currently is titled Mold the Wing to Match the Photograph, which I co-curated with my colleagues Samira Bose and Pallavi Arora. The idea behind this exhibition was to kind of look at the back and forth between an artwork and an artist's archive. And is a way to kind of think about how Mukherjee's digitized archive altered and disrupted our perceptions of her practice, especially for those of us who are based in New Delhi and had the opportunity to view her phenomenal works in galleries and museums here. And on the right-hand side, you can see Mukherjee's 7 feet high fiber work called Pari, which can loosely be translated as nymph or otherworldly being, and made in 1986. So the work is installed in the library area. And on the left-hand side, what you see on this big pillar is the blown up image of the installation instruction for the same work that was prepared by her. So it's on the, I mean, the installation instruction is on the other side of the pillar that you see on this image and is lined with the artwork that is installed. And kind of, again, the idea of back and forth between the artwork and the installation instruction, which is originally A4 size and it is blown up to the scale of the artwork. So in this exhibition, we kind of wanted to highlight the significance of photography and photo documentation in her artistic practice, and to show our immersion in the archiving process itself. So her extensive photo documentation of her own work allowed us a certain closeness to her sculptures and showed how she employed these images as a means to study her own work. And these meticulously captured photographs also serve as precise reference points for the installation process, which we also referred to when we were installing her work, as we see in the installation instructions in this slide. Next slide, please. As we were digitizing the archive, we kind of encountered the material in abundance and excess, particularly her artwork documentation in the form of 35 mm slides, black and white negatives, contact sheets, printed photos, and so on. And there were thousands of these images. The reproductions of some of these you can see in these channeled frames in this slide, which kind of provided us a microscopic perspective of the creatures that she created in her works. And Mukherjee's sculptures are huge and they project majesty and awe, while her archive kind of houses an extensive collection of these minuscule kind of slides, which presented a captivating contrast for us. And this set of slides also kind of became almost like a mini retrospective, mini in terms of scale of images as well, of her works spanning 3 decades from 1970s till the early 2000s. And photographed at different sites like her studios, garage space, parking lots, terrace garden, outdoor sites, and so on, which kind of also inverted the way we experience her works otherwise. Next slide, please. What we also wanted to showcase was how Mukherjee employed various strategies to capture the monumental 3-dimensional works and the space around them in the 2-dimensional medium of photography. So what you see here is a series of photographs of one work where each artwork was kind of photographed in a quick succession from every possible angle, an almost imperceptible shift in the angle, producing this animation-like form. And during digitization process, we were quite struck by this performative element that you can see in this slide here, a small set that you see at the bottom. Next slide, please. And we were so immersed in the materials for over 2 years, we almost felt haunted by them. And in displaying the kind of contact sheets in rapid succession, we wanted to showcase our own experience of the archive. And the 2 iPads that you see in the corners have a video made by animating one of these contact sheets by blowing up the images, where you see, you kind of encounter the specter of the artist suddenly appearing amid these artwork images. Oh, and during digitization process, every time we would kind of take out an envelope from the box, it would carry hundreds of negatives or sleeves full of contact sheets or printed photos. And we were kind of struck by the multiplicity of these images. And more interestingly, these carried markings indicating how Mukherjee's work was perhaps presented, reproduced, and circulated in those decades. This and such encounters in the archive brought us to think about the photographic apparatus in a deeper way. So while working on Mukherjee's archive and then this exhibition, we kind of began thinking about the interplay between photography and sculpture. What role does photography play in shaping artistic practice? How do sculptors employ the apparatus of photography? How do reproductions function independently and impact our experience of a particular artist and their artwork? What new perspectives on photography of sculpture are formed through analog and digital circulation? Needless to say, photographs are kind of tools that direct the ways in which we experience culture, but they also kind of indicate how we narrate its history and its readings today. So our readings of sculptural practice have shaped with the ways in which we have encountered these photographs in the archive of Mrinalini Mukherjee, but also in another such archive from AA's collections, the personal archive of late Hong Kong-based sculptor, printmaker, and documenter Habik Chun, which also contains excessive photographic materials, focusing on art practice and exhibition histories in Hong Kong from the decades of 1970s till the 1990s. So we thought of bringing these two artist archives in dialogue from two completely different regions and contexts. Their practices are divergent, and their use and understanding of photographic apparatus is also quite different. Nonetheless, these photographs in the archive reveal some interesting points of interconnections and departures that we wish to unpack in today's conversation. So moving forward, I will introduce today's speaker. Rebecca, may I request to stop the screen sharing, please? It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, and I will do that in the order of their presentations. Today we have with us Dr. Emilia Terracciano. She's a Welsh-Italian multilingual writer, teacher, and art historian, committed to expanding and amplifying the ecosystems and publics for art history. In 2020, she joined the art history department at the University of Manchester. Her areas of specialty include modern and contemporary South Asian art and its diasporas, colonial studies, post-colonial criticism, and critical ecologies. A Linnean Society Fellow, Terracciano received numerous grants, including the Paul Mellon Center, Sasawaka Peace Foundation, University of Oxford John Fell Fund, and Nehru Trust for the Indian collections at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Terracciano is the author of Art and Emergency, Modernism in 20th Century India, a book that was published in 2018. She's edited the volume Nasreen Mohammadi from the Glenbera Art Museum, which was published in 2022. Emilia Terracciano has traveled extensively in India and has been researching on modern and Indian art, especially Mrinalini Mukherjee's practice, and has interviewing readings of Mukherjee's practice. And I welcome her today to share her propositions on the concept of scale and mass and the site, which will address some of the questions that I raised in the beginning. Our second speaker is Michelle Wong, who is a PhD scholar in art history at the University of Hong Kong, exploring modernity in post-World War II Hong Kong. Her writing is published in Ambitious Alignments, New Histories of Southeast Asian Art, 1945 to 1990, a volume that was published in 2018, and the journal Southeast of Now, published in 2019. From 2012 to 2020, she was a researcher at Asiatic Archive, focusing on Hong Kong's art history and histories of exchange and circulation through exhibitions and periodicals. Some of her important curatorial projects include Portal Stories and Other Journeys at Tycoon Contemporary, which curated in 2021. Afterglow at the 8th Yokohama Triennale that took place in 2020, and the 11th Gwangju Biennale in 2016. Michelle runs the independent space in Hong Kong for New Park with artists South Ho Siu Nam and Billy Etsy Kwok. Michelle is our former colleague and has extensively exchanged and engaged with the personal archive of the late Hong Kong-based artist Ha Bik Chun for over a decade while she was working at AA, and now she has developed this research further into her doctoral thesis. And I'm very much looking forward to Michelle's close readings of photographic materials in Ha's archive, addressing the questions about self-representation, scale, and materiality. Just before we begin, some housekeeping. This session will be for 1.5 hours. After Emilia and Michelle's presentations, we will have a conversation, and then we will open the session to questions from audiences at the end. So if you have any questions, please type them in Zoom's Q&A feature, and you can do this anytime during the talk, and we will do our best to take them up in the discussion. So without any further ado, I'm now going to hand it over to Emilia.
Thank you, Nupur. I will share my screen. Can you see my screen okay? Can you hear me, more importantly? Hello,
Yes.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Nupur. Thank you, Asia Art Archive, for inviting me to share my my writings or my research about fascinating work of Mrinalini Mukherjee. And I really look forward to being in conversation with Michelle and think about resonances across the medium of photography in relation to the artist that she's been extensively writing about, Habik. And on a personal note, I've always been fascinated by the relationship that artists develop during their careers vis-a-vis the medium of photography, which is a crucial dimension, especially for Mrinalini Mukherjee in terms of how she thought about the work process, the material itself, but also about how to reach out to faraway audiences. So not just thinking about the context of India, but also Europe, the United Kingdom, America, and even Australia. So because of the weight, the scale, and the mass of her fiber sculptures, photography was instrumental in sort of making her work travel across wide expanses and introduce it to new audiences. So I'm interested by the complex ways in which sculpture and photography intersect historically, aesthetically, but also theoretically, and how images of sculptures and artworks have played a crucial role also in the history of photography itself. So I've been very much drawn to the impact that photography has had on the creation and the interpretation of sculptures, and especially, as I said before, in the career and modernist career and output of artist Mrinalini Mukherjee. So for those of you who do not know about Mrinalini Mukherjee, also known as Dilu, she was born in 1949 in Mumbai and died in New Delhi in 2015. She was the daughter of famed artist Binod Bihari Mukherjee and Leela Mukherjee, a phenomenal sculptor. And both artists, both her parents, in their own unique ways, were very familiar and presented their artworks both in terms of photographic media, but also filmically. And the well-known filmmaker Satyajit Ray even produced a film about Mrinalini Mukherjee's father, Binod Bihari, entitled The Inner Eye. So photography or mechanical reproduction at large was a world that Mukherjee knew very early on in her life and career, also because of the rather privileged background and upbringing that she enjoyed as a child. And for over 25 years, from within the confines of her improvised studio, her Barsati, which is a shed or a covered building space that you see here in this particular photograph, located in Nizamuddin East in New Delhi. Mukherjee twisted, knotted, folded, and twined fiber, an unusual choice or medium at the time. And she turned this fiber into these mammoth, very weighty, heavy sculptures. She was one of the outlier artists and operated on the margins of the post-independent New Delhi Indian art scene. She was out of touch with the more political, painterly narrative and figurative trends of art at the time. She turned a blind eye also to conceptual art, the linguistic turn, and the global drive towards de-skilling in the 1970s, and became incredibly stubborn about the craft-like nature of her own work, but also process and type of process she chose. And she sourced this fiber locally in New Delhi, and it was used on every day as an everyday medium by many to produce charpais, which are sort of small beds, but also also used to produce rugs and wall hangings. She claimed that she liked the look as well as the feel of this fiber. and was also very drawn to the possibility of dyeing and coloring this fiber in a variety of ways. So there was a lot of, I'll go delve into this aspect later, but there was a lot of planning involved with this, with the making of these complex sculptures. So what you see here is a photograph presumably taken by her husband, Ranjit Singh, who was an architect and owner of a camera. And what you see here is the sculpture Amal Tash hanging rather casually on a wall in her barsati on the balcony. But also to the side, you can see a door. There's an opening into a rather dark room. And you see Mukherjee looking at a slide, presumably again a slide of a sculpture of hers. So I was really interested in this photograph because it already shows how Mukherjee was not only invested in the medium of photography to present and introduce her sculptures, but also as a way to think about the future presentation of her work. So by looking at this slide and contemplating it on a smaller scale, as Nurpur mentioned earlier on, she's already thinking about projecting this sculpture into a future, for an audience and an imagined public. Now, I don't know, I can't tell. I wish I had a magnifying lens and could look at this tiny little slide and see what it is. But it's all nicely captured by Ranjit Singh, who was her sort of invisible interlocutor, but also vital collaborator, and helped not only photograph and seal these images for posterity for us today, but also helped Mukherjee source and create these larger-than-life sculptures. So I think it is almost impossible today to think about Mukherjee's sculptures as distinct from the photograph. And it might be indeed argued that her flamboyant, eccentric, and unique form of sculptures were completely dependent on the apparatus of photography for the development, but also for researching into the possibilities that sculpture could take up, could embody, and as I said, also as a way to reach out to a distant imagined public. And this is something that I think the Asia Art Archive in India was trying to grapple with as a speculative proposition in the exhibition. And it is something which grows in all direction, which I wish I had seen. But again, there was this interest in the archive, but also in the possibilities that photography as a medium could open up for the projection of an imagined future for these sculptures. Where do they live and how do they inhabit the present today, perhaps? So photography was of course known to a number of many other artists, including Pilo Pochanwala, Latika Khat, and Meera Mukherjee, amongst others, who lived and worked at the time slightly earlier than Mukherjee, but between the 1950s and 1960s, and produced works which were monumental in scale. So they welcomed and took head-on the multiple material, logistical, and even infrastructural challenges that the material and scale that these works posed, and relied on the medium of photography to frame and convey a novel perception of the sculptural output and professional persona, as Mukherjee did. But as you can see in this particular photograph, they photographed their works. This is a work in steel by Pochanwala entitled Scale, that were in isolated settings, and most importantly, I think, for what concerns us today, is uncoupled from their makers. So rarely, if ever, do you see these artists pose alongside their creations. What you see are works that are cropped from their surroundings and convey this distinctive modernist aura. And I have to say that most of the time they also relinquish control of the photography to their gallerists who commissioned photographers to document these works for exhibition catalogs and so forth. So the more performative aspect of photography that we find in across Mukherjee's output is absent from these photographers' work. Also, I think something that needs to be added is the fact, the sheer abundance, the excessiveness, the exuberance of Mukherjee's archive. And I think, if you know, correct me if I am wrong, Nurpur, but I believe that this is the first time that this archive actually enjoys visibility. It's not something that Mukherjee shared during her lifetime. So it was really used in a very selective way on her part as an important tool in the making and presentation and dissemination of her work, but also something that she kept to herself and studied before sharing with the public. So these are photographs, contact sheets, and slides that sort of enable us to grasp the totality, almost a filmic kind of approach to the sculptural work, like this three-dimensionality that you mentioned, Nurpur, is something that I think we can understand and is completely absent from other earlier artists. So I think it's really unique to Mukherjee's own approach to the sculpted object as this three-dimensional object in space. So it played a vital role during her career and the distribution and interpretation of her work. And I think she was one of the early artists to understand the emancipatory possibilities of this medium. It could dramatize the scale of her work on the miniaturized picture surface, but it also enabled one to understand the amount of workmanship and labor that was put into each and every single work. So often we find her grappling with the material and the challenges that this material poses, which, you know, fiber in itself is not something that you can easily sculpt. It's a difficult material that sort of goes against its own nature in terms of what Mukherjee is trying to do with it. But it's photography that gives this impression of seamlessness, of effortlessness that we can visualize, as in this contact sheet, for example. So I was interested in the issue of scale and how Mukherjee often is positioning her body in relation to her sculptures to make a certain kind of claim about her modernist status as an independent, allegedly independent female maker in post-independent India. And sieving through archives, I sort of was struck by some of the in Delhi in the archives, looking at some of these photographs of Nehru playing around and toying with maquettes, and also looking through microscopes at larger or in aggrandized structures. So you see there's this more, again, playful or performative side to modernism that we encounter in these stately figures. And I was struck by the claim that art historian Rebecca Brown made, and how the position of the engineer, but also that of the worker and his body, is emphasized in this new phase of India's industrial development. And this is a photograph, for example, by Sunil Jana, where again you see the worker almost a miniature worker in relation to these gigantic Bessemer conveyors in an industrial setting. So again, there's this play set up on the surface of the photograph between the worker and the industrial structure. And Rebecca Brown, and I quote her, writes that buildings and machines here serve as markers of India's success in the race to catch up, both aesthetically and technologically, Delhi, but they also mark the human scale at which that historical movement takes place. End of quote. So as you may know, Nehru inaugurated many industrial projects, including a 5-year plan programs, which lay a conception of rationality that has been at the heart of many scholarly investigations, and I won't go into. But what struck me about some of these photographs, particularly Sunil Jana's photographs of these industrial projects, was the fact that they were aired and distributed across a range of magazines, particularly the Illustrated Weekly, which is a widely circulated magazine with which many photographers all over India were very familiar with, including some of the photographers that worked for Mrinalini Mukherjee in New Delhi. And I'm thinking here of the architects, including her own husband, Ranjit Singh, but also engineers and other male workers who had access to cameras. So again, this understanding of modernity and of its scale on a miniaturized surface, that of the photograph, is really key to the grasp of their modern. And this is a photograph that comes much later into the picture. This is from 1972, a time when Mukherjee is living in New Delhi, operating in New Delhi as a sculptor. And again, you see that play with the miniaturized scale of the human in a monumental interior. This is through interconnected halls of industries inaugurated in New Delhi. So again, you can just about see these tiny little men perambulating within this structure. So again, there's this play at work. And it was Atreya Gupta, yet another scholar with whom I've engaged with, who singles out Sunil Jana as the pioneer figure who inaugurated the centrality of vision in the crafting of the post-colonial industrial Indian landscape. In the case of Mrinalini Mukherjee's practice, I think the planning, production, imaging, and distribution of scale of her fiber sculpture was single-mindedly imagined and imaged through the photograph. And this is an early work of hers produced in Baroda, where she studied under the mentorship of K.G. Subramanian. And already you can see how she's thinking and toying about this notion of scale and juxtaposing her own body with one of these early works. This is a work that concocts the image of a squirrel, and again, it's made with jute, and is hanging on a wall. So she recruited during her career, as I said, male architects, engineers, and urban planners who had access to the medium of photography and were very, very comfortable and familiar with it. And you can already see from this other photograph that she's choreographing a particular understanding of scale vis-a-vis her own work. And this image, you can almost see these two sculptures as two curtains opening into this impromptu setting, which is her own garage, and she's toying with one of her fiber sculptures, Devi. And there's a choreography at work here. There's also an informal aspect to these works, but also there's a certain seriousness on the part of Mukherjee. She is clearly engaging with these works and trying to convey a particular message about the scale and workmanship required to produce these gigantic works. It comes across again in a different photograph, shot once more inside her a garage turned studio, again, an informal space because these works were accreting around her and she wasn't able to showcase them regularly or sell them. So they were kind of growing and being stored in this garage, but also, as I said, in her Barsati, in her apartment in Nizamuddin. So they're growing around, they're crowding the space, and Mukherjee is again toying with this idea of scale to show the type of labor that is going into the making of these very strange sculptures.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Emilia.
Yes, no,
but maybe we could wrap it up in 2 minutes.
I'll wrap it up.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Again, this idea of embedding her own body and juxtaposing it alongside her works can be seen in this other particular photograph, which was created at the Air India headquarters. And again, you can see how she's trying to insert her own self to make a case about the largesse, the epic workmanship at stake in these gigantic works. And just to conclude, I wanted to share some of the later works where she doesn't include her own body, but is involved in a kind of staging of her photographs that defies our understanding, or in some ways defies the laws of gravity. And this is an aspect that I've written about, and I'm really drawn to, because there's something again that resonates with the photography of industrial the photography of Sunil Jana, the industrial photographer that I mentioned, about the magical possibilities that industry can breathe into the medium of photography. So here you see this suspended effigy defying the laws of nature on her balcony, yet again a photograph by Ranjit Singh. And again, it's hard to sense the scale at play here, because she's removed herself from it to kind of make this claim about her extraordinary work, and how it could or not defy the laws of nature, how it could be, suspended seemingly suspended in air. So I'll end there just to again reiterate the essential, the vital role that photography played in crafting a peculiar perception of her own work, but also in disseminating her sculptures abroad, given the logistical challenges that moving these heavy bodies posed. So I think it is almost impossible today to think about her career and her fiber sculptures as in any way separate or separable from photography and the medium of photography. So I'll end there. So thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Emilia, for this compelling presentation, and I'm looking forward to unpacking some of these ideas later in our discussion. We will move now on to our next speaker today, Michelle. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Nupur. And I also want to thank the AAA team, the curatorial team, and also the collections team for working on so many of the archives that we were able to talk about and look into today. The slide is left blank intentionally, so all good. And when Nupur asked me to consider that intricate relationship between photography and her sculptural practice, and one of the first things that sort of came to my mind was how I feel like her approach photography of sculpture is very differently from Mrilani Mukherjee. And instead of a tool of instruction for installation, which Nupur sort of explained how AA's team has explored that in the exhibition, and also as a way of staging sculptural works, which I think Emilia ended at that perfect note. Photography, in my opinion, served much more of a social function for Ha. Sculpture was a main part of Ha's art practice, and photographing them then became an important tool of self-presentation and documentation in service of creating and circulating his artist persona. And so in the next 15 minutes or so, I'll walk you through some of the examples that I think demonstrate and sort of support this proposition. But first and foremost, who was Ha Baek-chin? Ha Baek-chin lived from 1925 to 2009. He was born in Guangdong but died in Hong Kong. And he was a widely known figure in the Hong Kong art scene, a prolific artist who worked across multiple mediums, from printmaking to sculpture, painting, and collage. A person of working class immigrant background, did not attend art school. Rather, he worked as a craftsman making paper flowers in Macau before emigrating to Hong Kong in 1958. And during his lifetime, he made over 1,500 edition colographs out of over 100 colograph plates, which he calls in his self-invented term, his motherboard. He also made over 70 works of sculptures and a comparable number of paintings. And posthumous discoveries in his personal collections showed he constructed over 300 book collages that were not shared publicly during his lifetime. And it was actually during the artist Walid Raad's residency at AAA that we made this discovery. Ha's work drew extensively on imagery from different cultures and disciplines, from Japanese ikebana to Chinese literati art, to art from Europe and North America, Africa and Oceania, popular magazines, tabloid magazines, etc. And behind this prolific body of artwork was a personal collection of printed material and photo documentation of exhibitions that Ha collected and accumulated from 1960s to the year that he died in 2009. And he stored that in what he called the thinking studio. And from 2013 to 2020, I had the privilege and joy and often the pain of working on this collection of materials as AA's researcher for this project. And now this collection of material lives in multiple forms at different institutions, physically at AAA, M+, Baptist U, and Hong Kong U. Online, I think, not only at AAA, but also at M+, and also as a book. And it has also had multiple incarnations as exhibitions at various times. And here you see one of the exhibitions that that AAA made, and that I had the privilege to curate as well. In her book, 1996 book, Inventing the Modern Artist, Art and Culture in the Gilded Age America, the art historian Sarah Burns considers the formation of artist persona by artists who were conscious of their self-presentation and its effect as integral to the modernization process in 19th century America. Key to this process was the self-awareness of artists as actors being acted upon, that the ways that they represented themselves for the media and consumption shifted the ground on which they acted. And you might be wondering, what similarities do 19th century America and mid-20th century Hong Kong share? And the answer is more than you might have imagined. Many of these conditions were structural, required for their respective modernities to emerge, such as rapid economic and urban development, and the rise of a capitalist class. And in Hong Kong's case, after years of social unrest in the 1960s, various government-led campaigns led to stabilizing structural changes in the society, such as a large-scale public housing scheme, a growing civil service, and the expansion of economic opportunities in the manufacturing sector, largely comprised of immigrant labor force. And the development of public infrastructure and increased financial stability in Hong Kong paved the way for a stronger consumer culture of products and the proliferation of advertising culture and its surrounding visuality. I suggest that this in turn made artists more conscious of the ways they could perform as artists in different social circles, as well as the marketplace of art and commerce in general. Academic training for artists in Hong Kong at the time was limited. Although there was a studio art department in the Chinese University of Hong Kong, New Asia College, and an art history department at the University of Hong Kong, tertiary education was not widely accessible for Hong Kong's population. There was also no dedicated tertiary level art school at the time. Those who were interested in becoming artists and could afford an overseas education studied abroad, while others like Ha's peers resorted to teaching themselves art by attending distant learning courses and classes offered by extramural studies department in local universities. Individuals who took up artistic practice and called themselves artists often had jobs to sustain their livelihood. Many of these practitioners played more than one role other than that of the artist. They were also organizers of exhibitions, they were writers, and in some cases, even dealers and gallerists. Practitioners in Hong Kong at the time therefore expanded what an artist could do beyond making by occupying multiple roles in a developing art world. And this idea of artists as an unstable category, which is the anchor of Sarah Burns' study, rings especially resonant for mid-20th century Hong Kong. And Burns' examination of the self-fashioning of artists, therefore, I feel, offers a useful approach to think of Hong Kong's emergent artists in the post-war period, like Ha, who wanted to draw on new and sometimes untested methods to define themselves as artists. And in Ha's case, he utilized photography and those of his sculpture to do so very, very effectively. And in the 1960s, when Ha's peers were pursuing extramural studies department courses or studying overseas, Ha was managing a struggling small business, raising a family, and developing his art practice. Many of the artists in Hong Kong at the time, such as Lui Xiaoquan and his protégés in the Intel Art Group and One Art Group, as well as the quote-unquote local avant-garde, the Circle Art Group, were also recent immigrants from mainland China. However, their social background varied. Unlike Ha, who came from a humbler working class background, a number of these other artists came from a class of intellectual and economic elite who received tertiary education in art and other subjects, and worked predominantly in ink painting. Those who worked in sculpture, such as Cheng Yi and Wen Lao, worked with more classic materials like bronze, plaster, and wood. And perhaps as a result of circumstances and his own choice, Ha developed a sculptural practice that drew on materials that were part of his lived experience as a working class immigrant, ranging from bamboo to rattan and other found materials. The circulation of images of himself as an artist with great affinity to the materials he worked with offer Ha a way to validate his practice as distinct from his contemporary. And throughout his life, Ha took hundreds of photographs of himself with his sculptures inside his studio and at exhibitions. These self-portraits were scattered throughout his thinking studio, stored in different albums, folders, and containers, weaving together a visual biography of Ha as an artist. And in a photograph taken in 1973, which is what you see here, Ha, clad all in black, folded his arms and sat barefoot in front of his work, The Sound of Nature, which measures as 160 by 156, which is quite a big size. And The Sound of Nature is a surface composed of 4 quadrants of rattan and bamboo segments. Ha colored the bamboo segments with industrial pigments, torched them for speckle and an aged effect, and created decorative hollow patterns on the outermost red layer of bamboo with a heat rod. Both rattan and bamboo have a history of being part of working class lives. They were used as manufacturing and construction material for furniture, bamboo scaffolding, and poles, to name a few. And at the same time, they were also materials used in everyday objects, from mats to hampers to sieves to eating utensils like bamboo chopsticks, consumed by the same people who utilized their raw forms to make a living. By incorporating these vernacular materials into part of an art object, Ha disassociated them from their use, function in urban life, and in the same gesture also acknowledged the working class point of origin of his art practice in an enigmatic way. This portrait, which Ha used for a publication and was widely circulated, also captured the green and white diamond tiles on the floor, a feature of working-class apartments in Taoguawan, where Ha and his family lived. And the tiles resonated visually with the colorful diamond form of the Sound of Nature's bamboo segments. This stage portrait is impactful because it cited Ha's working-class background and highlighted the found materials he worked with. Other found materials Ha incorporated in sculptures include sawdust, newspaper, and magazines, which are byproducts of other processes and would eventually be considered expired, out of date, of little to no use, and waste. Ha's inclusion and transformation of them into art objects is thus a reinvention of their use and an expression of the aspirational position of Ha's art practice. And by framing himself as an enigmatic figure at the center of the image's composition, who faces the camera frontally and looks directly at the viewer, Ha lays authorial claim to the elevation and transformation of these materials. Throughout 1970s, Ha steadily gained recognition of the art scene by regularly exhibiting in gallery and official exhibitions. In 1976, the Urban Council Award, Ha won awards in not one, but two categories of sculptures and prints, an achievement that established him firmly as part of the Hong Kong art world. And at the winner's exhibition, the contact sheet of which you see here, Ha exhibited 14 prints and 6 sculptures, making him the artist with the most work on view. And this contact sheet shows a carefully planned and executed photo shoot. 5 of the 16 frames pictured Ha frontally with his prints and sculptures, where he occupied, again, the central lower part of the composition. And you also see these marks, which again, is a way of him framing of how these photos should be developed. And Ha's artwork takes up most of the remaining space in these frames, either flanking them from behind or surrounding them. The viewer's gaze is directed towards Ha as the composition's focal point. And these dramatic portraits were punctuated by carefully composed installation shots that show the exhibition space. And you see that sort of in the second row, especially on the left, first left. They show how Ha's sculpture were placed in space and how they're in conversation with works by other artists, like Frog King's Rattan-Si's sculpture and Wang Pui-gong's painting. I suggest this indicates Ha's self-awareness that to be an artist is not only about being recognized as the creator and maker of art objects. It also comes with knowing how and where the objects were being exhibited and viewed. Apart from featuring his sculptures as backdrop and set for photographs, Ha also uses photography to express his intimacy and playfulness with his sculptures. Throughout his documentation, Ha could be seen standing around them, one arm akimbo, laying an arm over them, and sometimes even embracing them with both hands. It was as if Ha wanted to confirm or reaffirm his position as artist and creator of these distinct art objects set upon pedestals, engage in a singular conversation of their own. These playful photographs were often taken at exhibition openings, which in turn suggested a kind of performativity, a desire to be seen by others who were also present at the social event, and a knowingness that one was seen in these moments. It is through such documentation that we are able to not only see the slice of art history that Ha participated in and recorded through photography, but we are also able to observe the changes of his sculptures, from reliefs to sculptures in the round that were nevertheless meant to be viewed from the front, to his later works of unmistakably human figures that feature found objects and a distinct two-dimensionality as part of their abstraction. I suggest that the performativity in Ha's photographs with his sculptures make the less public moments of documentation, such as those that he took in the rooftop of his workshop and inside his thinking studio, even more telling of the intimate relationship Ha shared with his sculptures. A contact sheet from 1995 titled Big Trim Sculptures 95 shows consecutive shots of 2 sculptures made from wooden washing boards. These sculptures each stand on a thin circular wooden pedestal that was likely repurposed from chopping boards, while geometric and circular shapes in green, red, and white are embedded on their front and back surfaces, and have sort of photographed this obsessively throughout, not unlike Mukherjee, sort of in succession. 32 out of the 36 frames were off the two sides of each sculpture, shot outdoors in Ha's workshop rooftop. And the remaining 4 frames saw the 2 sculptures set indoors, next to tools like paintbrushes and bowls, and in front of one of Ha's motherboards. And in this indoor setting, Ha's 2 sculptures seem to have become protagonists of a scene, engaged in their own activities. And Ha, being the photographer and director of this act of photographing, was the overall orchestrator of it all. And this I want to bring my presentation to a close with this, that by obsessively documenting himself with his works in myriad ways, Ha turned this moment of self-presentation and performance into an embodied and sustained experience that traversed through not only his workshop space, his thinking studio, but also moments of exhibitionary and performative, both in public and in private. And these photographs and documentation takes on a different and another life as they become digitized and could be hosted at multiple institutions and accessed by multiple users at various places and at different times. Their sheer volume and repetitive nature also seem to get highlighted and compounded in the process of digitization. And Nupur and I have had sort of multiple conversations about this. And I look forward to sort of discussing this amongst other things in the remaining time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle, for taking us through your journey, but also the materials that we see in Ha's archive, and also kind of providing us interesting entry points for us to think through in this conversation. As kind of you both were speaking about Mrinalini's and Ha's photographic materials, one thing that comes to my mind is this interesting relationship that photography has with this particular time period. And I mean, we are thinking about the decades of 60s, 70s, and 80s in both these archives. And also kind of then photograph serves as a document, which kind of to capture as kind of clues to the past that needs to be understood within its context. So photography not merely as a tool for documentation, but it also kind of changes the modes in which sculpture is kind of thought about. And I mean, I was thinking about the specific overlap in both your presentations about time, as I said, and the larger context from within kind of these two practices emerged. And I was curious to, I mean, Emilia, you kind of spoke about the photographic practice, the field of photography, how it was developing in this period in post-independence India. Or Michelle, you kind of spoke about the post-World War kind of scenario within which particular kind of practices that were emerging. I mean, you spoke about Ha being a self-trained artist and how the role of camera was important from him being coming from a working class background. But also I was thinking about a conversation about a particular kind of practice in the field of sculpture, say relief works, which was prevalent in those times in Hong Kong. So I was kind of just thinking about, I mean, if you would, I mean, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the larger context from within which these kind of practices emerge, especially in the context of photography, because photography by these sculptures was thought in a very different way, probably for the first time in this period. So if you could kind of maybe elaborate on that, Emilia, maybe. If you'd like to go first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by the archive of Habik and how Michelle's sort of shed light on the more intimate aspects. What strikes me above all, you know, comparatively speaking, is the fact that Ha however much I'd be tempted to view these extensive, this incredible, extraordinary archive in terms of selfies, they are not. She is delegating the work. She, I suspect, does not know how to operate a camera, but she has access. As I said, she came from a privileged background, but also had access to an intimate group of very skilled, architects, urban planners, engineers who were well versed in, photographically speaking, and owned many cameras, and she could, figurative speaking, rope them in all kinds of labor. So, both making the work, helping her create these sculptures, but also documenting them. And so there is this, yes, performative aspect, but also unacknowledged collaborative dimension. So these photographs don't just emerge from nowhere. They are carefully orchestrated and curated by Mukherjee, but made by others. So she's delegating, and she's, I suspect, telling people exactly what to do. So, she's engaging with the cameraman. She's thinking, projecting herself into the future, imagining an audience for these unusual creations in settings that are not exactly professional. Settings for her sculptures are yet to be imagined, are yet to be created. They don't exist anywhere at this point in time. So her garage, sometimes you see her, and I was again thinking about Michelle's artist, barefoot, sitting on the floor, not unlike Mukherjee. She's often sitting on the floor, wearing a sari and this kind of casual demeanor, which is again very carefully thought about, but barefoot. So again, barefoot on the concrete floor, surrounded by these ropey, strange creatures, unusual photographs for the time. And she's asking these men to make these photographs. There's this incredibly performative and theatrical dimension that accompanies all these works, which is unusual for the time, but in some ways quite similar to some of the works that Michelle was looking at. This intimacy, but also this performative dimension. The main difference again is that she's not making these portraits herself, but she's delegating and asking others to produce them for her. I also thought that it was very interesting. I'm not familiar with what was happening in Hong Kong at the time, but in the context of Delhi in the 1970s, there is this emphasis towards, creating spaces that can home industrial futures, industrial imaginations, and are photographed, again bearing in mind this this idea of the vanishing human, or the miniature human in a large context, and photography becoming the kind of handmaiden of industry and architecture, and how Mukherjee is presumably thinking about this world as well. Some of the materials that she's using come from working class backgrounds. She is not coming from that background, but she is again lifting those materials from their everyday working class context, and in the photograph presenting them as other. So Habik is using in that gorgeous portrait, Sound of Nature, these flattened out bamboo canes, right, stripped of context, and creating this seemingly industrial land, backdrop. And Mukherjee is doing the same. So these fibers are used at construction sites. I also mentioned the chapes, which are tiny little beds on which workers sleep rough on the streets. So she's using these materials and creating something that is not exactly industrial, something that is more about the homemade, the crafty gone wrong, I guess. Something that grows out of proportion, that becomes larger than life. So not quite domestic and cute, but rather grotesque even, and using photography to showcase this excessive labor that she has put into making these works. But photography is playing all these different kinds of roles, but the crucial difference, I think, they imagine in a landscape that is industrial, projected towards this idea of the modern, catering to investors abroad, but she is not creating them. She is not the author of these photographs. So I think that's the main difference, perhaps, with the other archive that we're thinking about here. I hope that's
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah, sure. Michelle, would you like to add or respond to that?
Ha got his first camera in 1980. And, in his collection of materials, you really see this sort of exponential increase of photographic materials taken by him after 1980. And the earlier portraits, which actually in the past, so in the presentation we looked at, a lot of them were earlier, so before 1980. So I would imagine those would have been done by other people. And we don't know who the photographers were. But by that time, Ha was financially much more stable, and so was able to then sort of hire people to do those photographs. There was this one particular slide, which I didn't show, from also around 1973, which then again is also Ha in black being crowded by his bamboo sculptures. There's a very similar crowding that goes on with Mukherjee's sort of fiber sculptures and the way that it was staged. And I guess as Ha Baekjun from 1980 onwards took most of his photographs. And I think it's maybe with that ease of, having more access to film. And, as the technology developed, it also became a bit cheaper. It's still very expensive. And maybe it was also to his own sort of obsessive intention and his own commitment to photographing his works, or using photograph as an extension of his eye and hands. There were just so many photographs that he would take. Not all of them were perfectly framed, or I wouldn't even say that the framing was thought through. But then the photography, or carrying a camera around, then became this tool for him to cross boundaries. Because when you have a photo camera at hand, you are an artist, but you also are a documenter. And then it gives you an in to talk to people you would otherwise not. You can ask people to pose. It's a way of drawing attention. It's a way of asserting presence. And I really do think for Ha, who did not work in this predominant medium of ink, which was very much sort of officially endorsed and sort of most dominantly shown medium, photography became a means for him to then enter the Hong Kong art world. And as he sort of worked in sculpture, then photographing himself with his works then also became a way of him asserting his sort of artistic identity. And I was also struck by how, Mukherjee and Ha were both modernists, and in their aesthetics, but also in their aspiration. But it seemed their aspirations were going separate or opposite direction, right? And that they were both taking materials from a working class urban life, but the aspiration was very different. Ha was clearly, at least in my point of view, sort of trying to elevate these materials into art forms that were singular and therefore more respected, and therefore putting them onto pedestals, making them fit within the dominant discourse of Hong Kong art being the confluence of Eastern and Western influences, and therefore making instruments that resemble Chinese instruments, sort of sculptures that resemble Chinese instruments. And it's in that sort of adaptation of his material language and visual language that I see this aspiration, this desire to not only be accepted in the art world, but also to be seen as modern, which the way that he was trying to do was to really take material from his urban lived experience, which again was differentiated and distinct from his peers working in ink paintings, and going along with this way of working of abstraction being a way of revolutionizing and modernizing ink. So it's a very sort of self-aware invention of a position of himself as a modern artist.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting about, I mean, the way you are kind of speaking about how he was using materials, and I mean, both of them are using industrial material in that sense, but in a very different way. And in Mrinalini's context, is also, I mean, it's interesting because she is also kind of challenging this pedestal-based practice. Sculptors who were using more kind of permanent materials. And then she's kind of moving towards indigenous practices, craft practices, and through that fiber becomes material for her. But also I was thinking about in that context, what Emilia was talking about, this industrial landscape and kind of very modernist kind of vision within which this practices kind of emerged. And also, I mean, there are these kind of underpinnings about kind of industrial context or kind of very modernist architectural spaces which were built. And then kind of these manufactured found objects that were used by her, for instance. So in both these contexts, I was thinking about how both of them are kind of thinking about materiality of the sculpture, and how does the particular choice of material kind of affect photography and vice versa. I mean, and what is happening with that kind of choice of the material in both these cases. So I mean, if we would like to kind of respond to that or elaborate on that.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating, Nopur, your point. I'm thinking about the contact sheets that you zoomed in and played with and displayed across, you know, these various iterations in Delhi and now in Hong Kong. The fact that Mukherjee is thinking about these sculptures as obviously as weighty, but also as three-dimensional. So, you know, she's doing away with the pedestal. She's clearly thinking about pedestal-free sculptures which rotate in space or seemingly defy, you know, the the laws of gravity. So they're suspended, and people can perambulate and walk around them. So again, she's imagining or envisaging these sculptures and as inhabiting an architecture, you know, and some of the contemporary critics, you know, are going back to Le Corbusier's modular, again, thinking about the human body in relation to these sculptures and how the human body is affected by these sculptures in space, what these sculptures command in terms of bodily movements, how, you know, they sort of demand that you walk around them in a particular way, view them in a particular way. That control carries through in the photography, and I think we can agree that Mukherjee is absolutely you know, she is the single directing intelligence. Like, she is really thinking so carefully about these sculptures and how they're meant to be viewed abroad, especially when they're installed in situ and she can't be there. Can't just imagine the anxiety and the panic about, you know, installing these works and she's not there, and the instructions are just so detailed, and every photograph matches a stage in the installation process. So there is this this aspect of process unfolding in time, but this three-dimensionality also unfolding in time, which is something that photography cannot deliver, the promise of three-dimensionality and process, and this idea of time unfolding is not something that photography can do. So that's the limit that she's working against, but also with, and hence all those slides, hence all those different photographs that capture, you know, almost every single point of the sculpture as she wants it to be seen. So I think that's the biggest limit she's having to deal with in terms of, you know, the possibilities that photography can offer and cannot offer as well. So so I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. So the flatness, you know, the photographic flatness is something that she has to be very conscious of. And also another aspect that comes that I think is fairly obvious to me is the self-consciousness of these photographs. So in the case of, you know, Michelle's photograph, there's a spontaneity, which in the case of Mukherjee's documentation is missing somehow. There's this, I'm working, I'm constantly working, these are the finishing touches, I'm tying up, I'm knotting away, I'm fondling these ropes. You know, she's always making herself look very busy around these works and playing with them rather than just simply posing. And with the more monumental works, I think that contrast in terms of scale is another aspect that she is, you know, exploiting photography for a very different reason, which I sort of touched upon to, you know, point at the industrial scale at which she is operating, which photography can do very well. That, you know, that particular aspect photography can present. I'll stop there.
No, that's very interesting. I was quite struck by the monumentality of, you know, not just Mukherjee's work, but also the other examples that Amelia you were showing of these sort of huge landscapes that you don't have in Hong Kong. You know, like what was a modernist landscape or a landscape of modernization in Hong Kong was, you know, like reclamation of urban sort of congestion and all of that. And Has works, and he's representative of his generation. And I can say that for, you know, other artists who were working in mid-century, was that their work was very much workshop scale. You know, apartments are small, and, you know, it still is. And if you have access to your rooftop, you know, then that dictates the scale of your work. And I think there's also a certain mirroring of that labor-intensive processes that were very much off the developing economy of Hong Kong at the time, right? That, you know, like Has whole family making paper flowers, you know, transforming different kinds of materials into other things, you know, making paper mache vessels to look like bronze. There's sort of these like imitation games of transforming materials, and in that process, a certain kind of abstraction that then finds way into the sculpture. And I find that sort of very different from the works that Mukherjee was making, that how should I say it, the kind of enigma or that kind of mythicality gets a different treatment. Mukherjee's, you know, drawing on myths and these sort of larger than life figures that are weird, peculiar. The enigma or the imitation game that Ha plays with his work is a different kind of cultural and symbolic value, I feel. That, you know, and this maybe goes back to what Nupur was trying to prompt me to talk about, which is the design, the restaurant designs that he did, which were, again, of industrial materials, of sawdust, of styrofoam, but then they get a patina finish, which was actually paint. You know, it was then trying to pretend to be something else. And playing to that whole sort of aspirational developing consumer economy that, you know, many in Hong Kong were participating in. And I think for the kind of art history that I'm interested in, which is then to then fold practices back into the social, cultural, historical context is very important, because then what we then realize is artists in Hong Kong at the time were working at this intersection of commerce and design. And this is possible and exciting precisely because the category of art, of what it is mean to be modern and what is art and what it is to be an artist, is unstable, it's undefined. And therefore the way that they work with materials, the way that they work with these forms, then defines, can't like have this possibility of defining these boundaries. And I imagine that being an incredibly exciting time, and for them to be in many ways unburdened by academic tradition. Whether that's a lack or that it's then turned into a strength, I think, you know, it can both go both ways. But I think that kind of sort of narrative or framing of sort of artistic modernism then becomes very exciting for me. And I feel, and I'm still sorting this out in my head, then has this really intricate and I think generative relationship with what we can sort of talk about as cultural modernity in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I think I'm interested in what you just said about, you know, the styrofoam and the patina that accretes around these surfaces, and how in some ways photography or how, you know, how Baker Mukerjees are thinking about photography as turning these works into timeless icons, as things that cannot age, as things that are modern, but also about the future. There is this slightly futuristic dimension, I feel. Also, you know, it comes across in those latest slides that you showed, where you have those, you know, you know, there's sculptures. I don't know if they're bronze, Michelle, but they're on pedestals, and they look, to me, they look very Mukherjee like. They are sort of you know, closer to what she produced towards the end of her life, when she started casting these large sculptures in bronze, which have, you know, a very distinctive industrial feel to them, but also are about organic protuberances or you know, vegetal beings and whatnot. But photography is something that distills, that prevents these images somehow from aging, these works from becoming about the past, becoming about something that was. So there is, I think, common to both this possibility that photography offers to seal them away, to somehow preserve them so that they never look old, that they never dissipate. Of course, this is not the case for both, but you know, I think what's striking about Mukherjee is also this idea. You know, she dyed her fibers with where, you know, dyes that were not natural. She was drawn to the industrial, to the artificial dimension in so many ways, and also she used you know, medical prosthesis. So on one particular occasion with her husband, she sourced this gigantic orthopedic structure appendix from a hospital dump, which she then hid away by, you know, creating this fiber sculpture and sort of hiding the you know, the metal structure beneath it, which obviously aged. And today, when you look at her work, some of them look a bit old, a bit like human bodies. They are sagging, they are, you know, weighty, and some of them look as if they're about to fall apart as well. They've lost their color, but in photography, they're preserved. and they look
Mm.
very modern. So there is this investment in color in the commercial world as well. I'm pretty sure that you know, Mukherjee had an extraordinary wardrobe. She was very up to date with the most you know, with all manner of fashions. She was really into technology. She traveled widely. She was not, yes, she was invested in indigenous techniques and craft practices, but she was also someone who was very savvy when it came to, you know, gadgets and you know, pop culture and things around her. She was not oblivious, and certainly not opposed to that world as well. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to see. I mean, what Emilia, you were talking about the resemblance in Ha's kind of photographs and Mrinalini's photographs. And I was also thinking about what Michelle, you said about staging or kind of, you know, creating a setup for his photos. And then which is evident in Mrinalini's works, obviously, because she is kind of again taking these photos at different sites, whether it's a garage studio, whether it's a terrace garden, and you can see the plants behind her artwork, or you see kind of a parking lot, you know, vehicles parked or kind of a shop shutter where you see her work. So it is kind of a very consciously kind of stage kind of settings that you see. But I was also thinking in case of Ha's practice, I mean, even though you were saying that it was predominantly his way of kind of inserting himself within the narrative of the art historical narrative, I was also thinking and wondering about, like, for instance, when you see those kind of paper flower vase, you know, where he's kind of staged those and taking photos of kind of his own portrait, or kind of his photos with those people who are sitting around the table and making those kind of paper flowers. So it is also kind of, or some of the exhibitions where he's kind of posing next to the sculptures, where it almost, I mean, one of the photos I remember when we were talking, almost looks like a forest that he has kind of created around himself, and he's sitting midst of that. So I was also, I mean, thinking about these like different elements which are kind of evident in both the archives. But I mean, I'm aware of time, and we have some questions from audiences. So maybe we would kind of take those up and then continue our conversation. So our first question is from Sneha Raghavan. Thank you for your amazing presentations, Emilia and Michelle. I'm curious about whether there are photographs of these artists with other kinds of works of theirs. For example, Mukherjee with her bronze sculptures, or Ha with his paintings, prints, and what you might mark as distinct in them. I'm wondering also whether crafting and its intimate relationship to body, hand, scale has something to do with their presence in photographs with their sculptural works. Would you like to go first?
I can go first. For sure, Ha photographed himself with many different kinds of his works, because, you know, he worked across so many different kinds of mediums. In this particular instance, I've just picked the ones with his sculpture. But I think in the first slide, you actually see, you know, it's an album that's called Pictures of Fiction, right? And it's him with his prints. It's him photographing his own reflection upon at a mirror. So then he definitely photographed himself with a lot more other kinds of work. But I would say that it is with the sculptures that you see the most intimacy. You know, you don't really see him hugging other things. You know, if it's a flat image, if it's a print, if it's a painting, you're not going to get all over it. But it is in that sort of, and Ha's a lot of Ha's sort of most effective sculptural works are of human scale. And so it is then you usually see him then hugging these things and being especially proud, and also sometimes asking his friends to also pose with it, as if, you know, like it can replace a body part of yours, it can be an extension of your hand, and it's this sort of playfulness and sort of interchangeability between sculpture and human body I would think that it is related to that sort of labor intensiveness in the process. But also, I guess also in the transformation and elevation of the material and a certain kind of humor, right? To really sort of be able to flip back and forth that is it art, is it not art? It is us who can play with it, who dares to play with it. I do think there is a kind of humor and wit in that, and photography does capture that. I almost would make the claim that photography captures that humor much more than the materiality. With that graphic flatness, that photographic flatness, you can't see the shine of the treatment that he's done to the bamboo. You can't see the textures of the sawdust that was mixed with glue, right? It really is in that encounter with the real art object, which I think in the AA show at the moment in Hong Kong, it's effective precisely because you get to toggle between these two. And I think then what a irony, right? And sort of almost a contradiction in that in trying to preserve the work in photography, you kind of lose what it actually is about. And I find that anxiety in Mukherjee is very, very interesting. And you see that in Haas too, like there are other contact sheets where, like he would take out his works from the 60s and rephotograph them again with himself next to it. Not in a professional setting again, because it's not in a white room, it's not in a studio setting, it's in his workshop, or it's at Kettle Depot where a lot of other art spaces are. So then these are somewhat informal spaces as well. But clearly this act of photographing these works perhaps even works as a reminder or sort of a reactivation of them of these works as singular objects with particular meaning. I don't know whether or not it's for Ha, I'm not sure if it's a projection into the future, because it's not necessarily staged that way, but there's certainly this sort of like visiting an old friend. I get that feeling a lot. And often, he's also photographing it with his family. And this intimacy and humor is, the more I think about it, is what comes through with the photography of his sculptures.
Thanks, Michelle. Emilia, would you like to?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of humor with Mukherjee, whether intentional or not, but there are some photographs where you just see her sort of laughing or engaging with the photographer and looking a bit less serious. But I was thinking about Sneha's question in relation to her later bronze works, and I think I've not thought about this aspect before because I've focused on her fiber sculptures more. But I think by that point in the in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, she has she's worked with so many different photographers. She's familiar with how photography displays and showcases her works, and I think she's less interested in appearing alongside her bronze work, so she relinquishes that presence, and her sculptures appear most of the time without her. So this anxiety, or perhaps she's a quite greater familiarity with the medium of photography, so she knows how photography works, and there's less of a need on her part to assert herself as, I have created this is my work, and therefore she no longer needs to make that kind of claim, that bold assertive claim that she had to perform and iterate again and again and again and again throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s when it came to her fiber work, because it wasn't taken very seriously by anyone, not just in India, but also abroad. So I think by that point, this idea of photography as staging a conversation or a dialogue in terms of scale is no longer needed. So works appear by themselves as modernist, as seemingly, sprouting from the ground. Although by this point, she's also happy for some of them to be exhibited on pedestals, which is something that she would never have entertained as a proposition during her lifetime. So something has changed, and she's become far more confident, I guess, about the nature of her work. She doesn't have to show herself in that same image. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Emilia. Just to add to that, I was also thinking, I mean, in terms of photographs, when it comes to her, especially her bronze works, a lot of focus is also on the surface and the textures of these bronze works that you can start seeing, which also kind of, I mean, a distinctive point or departure from her earlier photos. But I was also thinking that some of his ceramic works, for instance, also start appearing in more kind of institutional sites like EKWC. I mean, whereas you see her fiber works in more kind of informal spaces like her terrace garden or her kind of garage studio and so on. So I think there is something, as Emilia, you were saying, shifting within those decades. But also, I think by that time she had started working more closely with professional photographers by then. I think that also kind of reflects in the ways in which the works were photographed.
Absolutely, and to add to that, no, but also thinking about the materials now, she's working with a material which couldn't be, photographing fiber is the least flattering way of of showing a work. Like, you don't get that shine, that it's not a reflective surface as bronze in a way. So I think photography probably does more for the bronze sculptures than it does for fiber sculptures. But also, I think going back to, again, also Habik's, some of those photographs where you see these plants inside these interiors, like, I immediately think about, the mall, the airport, these sort of transitional spaces where, think about the potted plant. I mean, it is a strange concept, the idea of, putting a plant inside a pot and bringing it indoors, which is something that Mukherjee is doing also, with her works, just to create scale, but also to think about this crossover of the, the artificial and the natural coming together and colliding in these odd spaces. So I think photography is also doing that, and perhaps not with the bronze sculptures as much. Like, these are serious bronze sculptures. Yeah, they don't need other objects to make them come to life, as it were.
Maybe we can take this last question before we wrap up this session. It's from Rebecca Bray. Fascinating talks, thank you. My understanding of Mukherjee's archive is that it also contains many research images taken around India. Does she appear in these images as well? Or is her self-insertion only in relation to her own works? Emilia, would you like to respond?
I think you might be a better place to answer this one, or because Rebecca, thank you very much for this question. I've seen a few photographs, but possibly taken by others. So I remember shots of her and Ranjit on a motorbike, because they traveled a lot by bike. Other more sort of, again, informal photographs with colleagues and friends, having a laugh. I'm thinking about the Kazoli images with other artists, having a cigarette. There's many of those, having fun. But when it came to other sites, especially the temples that she visited, so many across, India and beyond, I correct me if I'm wrong, Nopur, but I think most of those extraordinary temples and temple architectures that she took are devoid of people entirely. Like, she's not there, but nobody is there either. So I think she's using these as you know, to study them, yes, and there might be one or two photographs where she's posing alongside them as you would as a tourist, but I think they're more for her own, her own research. But yeah, I think Nopur has seen way more of this archive than I have. I focused on a very small part of.
Thanks, Emilia, and thanks, Rebecca, for this question. So, I mean, in her travel documents, like Emilia said, there are very few images of herself. Also, I mean, what you see is that in early years, in the 60s, when she was traveling as a student, there, because she would also travel with friends, you would find some images of herself. But in the later period, in the 80s and 90s, she mostly traveled with Ranjit Singh, and there are a couple of photos of them. There are a couple of photos where you see, I mean, mostly these are taken Himalayan landscape, where you see a temple structure and Mrinalini kind of climbing on the mountain, or in a couple of instances where you see her, you know, the monumental kind of temple structure, architecture, and Mrinalini kind of standing next to it. But most of these photos are devoid of herself. But also, I think that one reason is she was also interested in the site, and the effect that site would have on her as a visitor, as a viewer. And also, I mean, though she was also visiting living temples, many of the sites, ruins, archaeological sites and abandoned sites, which are again devoid of human beings or any kind of functionality of the space. So and these maybe beginning points or reference points for her to kind of make these monumental sculptures, and many of these elements of performative kind of dancing bodies that you see are kind of very architectural elements, monumental elements that you see in her work. Kind of she's drawing on these images that she's been that she was taking at this point. It's 6:10 here in India, and I'm kind of mindful of the time. So I think that we can wrap up for the day, and then we will definitely continue these conversations. There are many interesting points, and actually had a lot of other questions also. But because of the limit of the time, maybe we will continue this conversation at some other moment. But thank you so much, Emilia and Michelle, for being here with us today and sharing your ideas. Today's conversation was extremely thought-provoking and will help us kind of shape our thoughts in this crucial yet understudied aspect of art practice, the multifaceted relationship between photography and sculpture. For those of you who are in Hong Kong.
Hello, everyone. I'm Özge Ersoy. I'm joining from Hong Kong. I was in the background. I believe there was a connection issue with Nupur. So I think I will conclude the program by thanking Emilia and Michelle for your presentations, for your contributions. And if you're in Hong Kong, our exhibition will be on display at Asia Art Archives Library until the end of this month, by February 29th. And I also would like to take this opportunity to thank our supporters, Mimi Brown and Arp Elçil, as well as Virginia and Wellington Yi, for their amazing and generous support for this exhibition and all the related programs. Nupur, I just jumped in to conclude, but please, the last word is, of course, yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry, my internet just dropped. So thank you so much. And before I say bye, a big thank you to our colleagues from the curatorial team for their technical support for this program, Rebecca, Ruby, Lily, and Ozge. And a big thank you to the curatorial team and my colleagues here in India office, Neha, Samira, and Pallavi, for their inputs and support in this program. And finally, thank you, all of you, for joining us today. Goodbye for now. and have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are.